So, it's not easy to disrupt an industry, especially one that has changed very little over centuries. But our guest this week has done just that. I'm Bex Burn-Callander, and this is episode 8 of Sound Advice, Get Year 1 in Business Right, brought to you by Sage. Our disruptor, an entrepreneur called Sam Watson-Jones, a 4th generation farmer and the founder of Small Robot Company. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Hi Bex, really good. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's so wonderful to talk to you. And this story is just absolutely fascinating. So I kind of want you to start from the beginning. So I've said you're a 4th generation farmer. It's a little bit more complicated than that because you're a farmer, but you also were a consultant at Accenture. So you're a sort of interesting hybrid of the kind of old world and the new world. Tell us a little bit about that.
I guess I never really thought of myself as a farmer growing up. I lived on the farm and worked on the farm, in the holidays and things like that. But I never thought, this is exactly what I want to do forever. And I think I wouldn't also say that I have always considered myself to be an entrepreneur either. I think that's something that's happened slowly. I guess by the end of university, I was interested in the farm, but I was interested in the family business really. I always thought that although farming was the only thing we did at the time, I always thought of it as a family business that happened to be involved in farming, if that makes sense, and it could ultimately become anything. But I also knew that I definitely didn't want to go straight home to the farm. I wanted to go and experience living in a city, and I wanted to go and do some other things. So the first thing I did straight out of university was actually Teach First, which is a great program for those of you who don't know. It's 2 years teaching in an inner city school, or it's an initial 2 years of teaching in an inner city school, and it's a fast track program where you basically cram your teacher training into about 6 weeks, and then you're on your own in a classroom, 30 odd kids, September the 1st. So it was about 4 or 5 months after I finished university. I was straight in at the deep end at that, and that was the reason I did that was not necessarily because I wanted to be a teacher, but I knew that it was going to get me as far away as possible into something different, to give me a completely different life experience, which it certainly didn't disappoint on that front. And it was and it remains, and I include starting Small Robot Company in this, it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I think the thing it taught me most of all was just the ability to get over disappointments. I'll take my first lesson as an example. I'd spent, probably 4 hours planning this lesson, right, for 1 hour with this year 8 class. And I went in, and everyone once they'd seen my timetable had said, yeah, that year 8 class that's gonna challenge you. That's gonna be pretty tough. And I went in, and the first 10 minutes was great. They were really quiet but really engaged. They were sort of doing the activity. They were just doing a little bit of writing, and about 10 minutes in, someone sitting, 2 kids sitting next to each other, someone pulled the paper away, and then that kid wrote on the desk accidentally, and then furious he turned around and threw his chair on the floor and whacked the other boy in the head, and then there were desks tipped over. There was and there was a full on brawl about 15 minutes into my teaching career. And I was obviously I didn't even know how to get control of the situation, for one thing. Also, I was devastated that I planned this great lesson that just didn't happen. And then you have to get over that and go on to your next lesson, which starts 30 seconds after that one finishes. And that happens time and again, particularly when you don't know what you're doing, which I didn't know what I was doing. So that was great. And then I actually had a year. I got a job at Accenture, and I actually had a year. My job was supposed to start in September 2008, which is not a great time to start in a new role. But they actually postponed my placement for a year, but kept it, and then that gave me a year to go and work on a farming charity called Jamie's Farm, which was about taking kids from Teach First type schools, inner city schools, and giving them an experience on the farm. And I think that year was really important for me because I started to think, actually, you know what, farming is something that I want to be involved in. That year back out of the city, if you like, although I was still living in London at the time, was really helped me to sort of fall in love again with farming, if you like, and think, yeah, at some point this is going to be something that I'm going to get involved with. And then Accenture, teaches you all sorts of things, and working in a big company, it taught me all sorts of things that were useful. And I think particularly it was about understanding and implementing new technologies, and that really sparked that as something that I hadn't really thought about in much detail before, and that has that has remained very definitely.
Well, that's really interesting, because you've basically followed the perfect path for anyone who's going to join a family business, because they always say you never go straight into the family business. You have to get experience outside, ideally in other industries, and then bring all that home. So that's amazing that you did that and that you found that really valuable. But then when I suppose you did come home, what was the big problem that you were trying to solve? Do you mind just giving us a bit of background about the challenges that farming is facing, and specifically sort of the farm that you were trying to look at and change, and how that became the seed of an idea for a small robot company?
There were three separate incidents, I think. The first one was when I went back home. I just threw myself into being a farmer and tried to sort of learn how the business was operating, and part of that was starting to understand how it ran as a business. Where were our income streams coming from? What were our costs? All of those sorts of things, and trying to grapple with those figures. Dad, bless him, has only just sort of realised that Microsoft Excel exists as a concept, and actually everything that he had, he was very good at recording figures, and so was my grandfather before him and my great grandfather before him. But everything was done in pencil, and so all of our performance figures, our costs per acre, our revenues per acre, were meticulously recorded in pencil in these red books that were stacked up. And I thought, well, there's got to be something useful in those books that I can discover if I can find a way to analyse the data. So I spent an afternoon. I picked about a 25-year period where I was going to go, okay, well, I'm going to get the bulk of the data out of these books and put them into a spreadsheet. And what that exercise taught me, it was very boring, but what it taught me was that actually our revenues hadn't increased for 25 years, and our yields hadn't increased for 25 years. I was doing this, I think, in 2016, and the yield was exactly the same in 2016 as it was in 1990, and the amount that we sold it for was pretty much exactly the same in 1990, and that really hit me like a bolt between the eyes, thinking, well, we're potentially in real trouble here, because of course over that time period the costs have gone up massively. I've since done some research on this, and the costs have gone up about 150% over that same time period, but the revenues haven't moved. But then I thought that wasn't necessarily the moment that pointed me towards Small Robot Company, because there are ways you can wriggle out of that. There are other revenue streams you can pull in. There are things you can do to improve the business. There are different systems you can adopt. The first one, when I thought, right, there really needs to be something significant that changes here, was actually a conversation with an 80-year-old guy who used to work on the farm. He used to work for my grandfather, and he'd lived next to this field for 40 years. And I was just talking to him, stood there one day, and he casually remarked that this field used to be about 20 inches higher than it is today. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the level of the soil was about 20 inches higher than it is today, and that was really scary, because that just meant that the field was disappearing. And I started to do some research on this. And this is soil erosion. This is a huge issue, and it is something that we created as farmers. So we had a farming system, as most people did at the time, which was pretty intensive. So it was about intensively cultivating the field, ploughing most years to sort of reset the soil. And what that does basically is it loosens the soil up. And then what we'd also do is apply broad spectrum herbicides across the whole field. So you kind of kill everything that's in the field. And so there's nothing that is alive, or there's very little that's alive in that soil. And that makes it really vulnerable to water and wind erosion. And little by little, the field was disappearing. And that, when I calculated that, on that field, that is thousands of tons a year. And this has been going on for 40 years, and it's been going on for probably longer than that. But it's really accelerated in the last 40 years. And I suppose this is something I've learned since, because of the intensive way we've used tractors. And then I think the second incident that was related to that was actually in the Beast from the East, if you remember, 2018, I think, really, really cold spring in the UK, where it's normally in the UK, obviously, if snow falls, it disappears as quickly as it arrives. But in this particular season, some late snows came and they stayed for about 3 weeks, something like that. And as I was driving around the farm, I gradually noticed that these huge banks of snow on the side of the roads were slowly turning pink. And I didn't know what it was, so I jumped out of the car and had a look, and it was soil. So we've got really sort of sandy, light soil, and what it was soil that was blowing off our fields and then being caught in this snowdrift, and only very, very fine particles, and then being frozen there in place, and then it was an indication of something that was happening all the time, but normally you couldn't see it. But just because of the particularities of there was snow and it stayed for a few weeks, you could see this soil disappearing, and it got worse as the days went on. You could literally see it day after day, and that was the moment when I thought, right, the farm is physically disappearing, and so regardless of what I'm able to work out in terms of diversifying income streams and things like that, there is going to be no farm. And I'm, as I said, I'm the fourth generation farmer, and that I suppose responsibility to the generations that have come before you is, that weighs really heavily on you. And I thought, well, unless there is something significant that we do here to protect our soil, to make it healthier, we're in real trouble. Us as a family farm, and then that, I think, linked to what I was saying about Accenture. I thought, well, there has got to be a technology solution that can enable a better way of doing this. I think that was the first spark towards something that became Small Robot Company. But the next crucial step was just starting to talk to different people who had ideas, and in particular there was one guy working at a university, an academic working at a university very close to me, a guy called Simon Blackmore, who had developed this concept of asking the question of, what if it wasn't big tractors and tractors just getting bigger in the future of farming? What if it was small robots instead? What would the future of farming look like? And I thought this was a fascinating concept. It hadn't been developed into anything that was real. Simon particularly said, I'm pretty sure this is something that farmers want, but it's not being developed yet. And that, and actually he said a sentence which was really important to me, which was, what is needed is an entrepreneur to sit between the gap between technical possibility, because all this stuff we're developing is technically possible, and customer demand. And that was a really important moment for me, because I just suddenly thought, yeah, that's going to be me. That's what I'm going to do. And I think that had been some time coming, and it's it's not quite the sort of bolt from the blue that you imagine it when you look back. But that was one really important moment. And then the other really important contribution that Simon made was he introduced me to Ben, who is my co-founder. And Ben and I, so we met, actually it was our 4-year anniversary of meeting on Monday.
Congratulations.
The first of thank you very much. It was the first of February. And so honestly, Ben was working at Ordnance Survey at the time. And we had a couple of phone conversations, and we said, right, well, let's catch up. Ben was working in London at the time, so I got the train down to London. And we met. We went for a coffee. Then we sort of walked around and had a bit of a chat. And then we went for lunch. And then by the end of lunch, we decided we were going to form a company together. And honestly, there was, I wish I could say there was more concerted thought than that, but it just kind of felt right. And so, yeah, went for it.
I'd like to go back a step though, because when you talk about meeting Simon, I imagine that a lot of people listening to this will perhaps have an idea of a problem that needs solving, and they may also want to use technology to solve that problem. How did you stumble across Simon though? Were you just kind of looking at all different universities and all different agricultural colleges to see what was going on? How did you make a beeline for him?
Yeah, so it was work that had been going on for a few years, and it's strange to think back, how you kind of join the dots up in your head, I suppose. It was work that had been going on for a few years, and he had always talked about, he'd done presentations, he presented at big conferences and things like this, where he had these concepts of the things he was talking about. And I had seen him talk, never met him, but seen him talk. And I remember him always emphasising the damage that tractors did to soil. And this really resonated with me. And he had some interesting figures, it causes £1 billion of damage in the UK, of economic loss rather, in the UK every year, and 50% of global topsoils are disappearing, and all these sorts of things. And that, I think I joined up the dots, and then I actually went to him to say, and interestingly, this is exactly the same way that Ben went to him. I went to him and said, I think what you're talking about is a solution that I need on my farm. Who's developing it? Can I offer up my farm as a trial site, or is there someone that I can? I wasn't thinking this was something I was going to start. I was thinking, is there some way I can be involved? I don't really know what that looks like. But I remember being really excited. I just emailed him out of the blue. I said, I'm a local farmer. I'm interested in what you're doing, and he got straight back. And that I thought, this is great, that he got straight back. So that was just lucky. And then when I went to talk to him, and he said, yeah, no one's developing this, and he had been and pitched it to all of the big machinery manufacturers, the people that you would think would build this thing, and they'd all say, no, it's we're not interested. It's too this is too different to what we do at the moment, and I didn't go into that first conversation thinking, this is going to be something I'm going to work on for, potentially the next decade or however long I work on this. I went in just thinking, this is interesting. I'll see what happens. And as the conversation went on, there was something in my head that said, this is what you want to do.
This is me. This is my job, my purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what I love about you, Sam, and what I love about this business is that it's been evidence-based. The approach has been wholly evidence-based from the beginning. Yeah. And even when you went to actually develop the robots, you didn't just go off and try and design something. That was all done in conjunction with farmers. Do you want to just tell us a bit about how you created that community, those sort of early adopters, but also this sort of active focus group that ultimately helped you build what loads of farmers were looking for?
So this was where Ben was great, actually, because Ben is an experienced entrepreneur, and he's been through the entrepreneurial journey 4 times previously. This is startup number 5 for him. So he said, we've got to focus on the customers, and before we spend any money, we should just go and talk to them. And so for the first 6 months, we didn't build any robots. Ben was still working in his job. I was still working on the farm. But I spent 6 months driving around, and I spoke to about 100 farmers in that 6 months. And I honestly didn't have a clue what I was talking about when I went to when I went into those first meetings. I had nothing. Like, I had Simon Blackmore's kind of cartoon concept things, and we're thinking about doing something around getting down to an individual plant level. Do you think that's interesting? What sort of things could a robot do that would be interesting? And just got verbally beaten up basically for about 2 months constantly. But it was great because you went into one meeting and you pitched something as an idea and they looked at you as though, you had 5 heads, and they said, well, that is rubbish, that will never work. And you go, okay, right, chalk that one up to experience. And then you go into the next meeting and your pitch has improved, and the way you talk about it's improved, and the proposition that you're developing has improved. But through that, I think through those conversations, there was a series of moments where I thought we're onto something here. There is a big idea here that we could work on. So we first employed someone in mid 2017. Which was Joe, our CTO, and so that's when Ben and I weren't taking any money out of it. But then we had someone who was they weren't taking much money. Joe wasn't taking much money himself, but we had some money that we had to come up with. And we didn't really have many means of funding that. Ben agreed to put a bit in. My family farm put a bit in, but it was only going to keep us going for a few months. It was actually my wife who came up with the idea of, why don't you try and get a group of farmers and take a deposit from them, which was a great idea, I thought. And so we came up with this concept of, okay, we're building this thing. If you believe in this, put down a £5,000 deposit, which will be a deposit on our services, and in return we will give you £10,000 worth of our service when it is ready. Now that was kind of easily said, very very difficult to do, and so the next 6 months from that point, probably. So this was mid 2017. By this point, we've done the initial interviews. Then from that point we go, okay, well, we're going to try and form this group, and we called it our Farmer Advisory Group. And as you said, Bex, we wanted it to be, yes, first customers. Yes, we were ideally looking for 100k, which we knew was going to see us through, sort of 9 months ish. So that was okay. Well, 20 farmers times 5. But then we also wanted it to become a community and become a focus group for us. And so that group still exists today. It's actually grown to just over 30 farmers now. And that group is just so central to everything that we do. So from the start, we were building the first robots, and so we said, well, this is roughly what we think the robots should look like. What do you guys think as farmers? I had an opinion as a farmer, but I was one farmer, and they have. And how much should it cost? What are the most important tasks that this robot should do? What are the things that in your normal working life are the most painful? What are the things you'd love to automate or have taken away or improved in some way? And so all of the product ideas that we have developed have been off the back of that group. But it was really, really hard to get that money out of them. Frankly, it was a big shift from here's this guy just driving around and just talking about some crazy technology that's never going to happen, to okay, I actually you and I, talking to the farmer, are going to do this. We're going to do this together, and for that to happen, I need you to make a financial commitment. And I haven't got anything, I have not got a robot to show you. I've got a pretty poor slide deck. I've got, I haven't really got a team, but we've got a clear idea of what this should be. And that sort of show of faith was a massive confidence boost. But it took a lot of persistence. It took at least 6 months to get it in. A lot of no's. A lot of no's that took hours to get to, and it was in a way, this is a bit of a startup cliche, but the reason that we were getting the no's was really encouraging, because the no's were from people who were saying, if this existed, I would definitely buy it. But either it's just not appropriate for me to put £5,000 in now, or I think it's going to be some time off, or whatever it might be. It was all kind of down to their lack of belief in the technology, but not in what the technology was going to do. But they weren't making an informed decision about the technology. It was just like, well, that sounds a bit far out. So they were useful. They were useful no's in that sense, but it was painful and it required a lot of just sticking at it. But it's been the foundation ever since. So it was a great thing to do. I'm really pleased we did it.
I really love the idea of the useful no, and not just seeing rejection as being painful, but actually seeing it as constructive, and also how it can contribute to how you know that you'll be successful, because it's a useful no. So that £100,000, how far does that get you towards building a prototype robot?
Yeah, not so far. I mean, no, actually, we built our first prototype for £5,000, something like that. But as Joe likes to say, it was bits and pieces bought off eBay and tied together with elastic bands and blue tack, essentially. It was not farm ready, but it got us into fields, and it looked like a remote control car, essentially, but with a camera, and it enabled us to start to gather data on the fields and start to understand actually what needs to happen in what the environment is like on a farm, and that was it was all really important learning stuff. The real breakthrough moment, though, where you thought, okay, this actually could happen, was winning our first Innovate UK grant. So we spent a lot of time applying for Innovate UK. It was so for those who don't know, so Innovate UK are government grants, UK government grants, where they fund 70% of your project costs. So you submit a project proposal under a particular heading, and you get 70% of those costs paid, but they're paid quarterly and in arrears. So you have to go out and you have to find the money in some way, you have to spend it, and then you get 70% of those costs back. But that really, we won a pretty big one. So we won one that was worth to us about £560,000 over 3 years. And that was the moment, and that was to develop the, and we'll come on to this, but that was to develop Wilma, our software package, which was about per plant recognition, and that was a real moment where you thought, wow, like we've actually now got some funding in place, and we can actually start to see this happening. And so at that point we could start to get a small team, and yes, we were still building the robots as well, but there was progress, there was momentum, there was funding that was secured. So that took us through to towards the end of 2018. So yeah, we were in not bad shape at that point.
And that's a really interesting point, because when it comes to building a robot that works on a farm, it's not as simple as just building a robot that works on a farm. You need to have the software behind it, you need to have the analysis, you need to have all the data and be constantly refreshing that data. So there's a whole wealth of other stuff that needs to be in place before you even put the robot on the farm. So talk me through that process and how complicated that might have been to set up as a pioneer in this field.
Yeah,
pardon my pun.
So those come up quite a bit. This was a real challenge, getting our head around what we were actually going to do, because the advice you're always given is go for something simple, go for the smallest thing you can do. And we were going for the smallest thing you could do, but the smallest thing we could do was really complicated. It was just multi-layered. And this has been something we've been grappling with for 4 years. It is, I think, the challenge of developing things for farming, first of all, but also being one of the first to do it. We tried for a long time in that first year to buy a robot. To just can we get an off-the-shelf robot so we can just get into the field and start gathering data, start working out what the robot can do, and we couldn't do it. We could have done things like hang a robot on a tractor, or hang a camera on a tractor, or hang a camera on a quad bike, or things like that. But they, for various reasons, they just weren't suitable solutions, and they weren't mainly around weight, and then they weren't. There wasn't a robot that we could buy, so we were forced into building the robot and building the software. And the technical challenges have been Yeah, numerous. This is a really hard startup to. It's a really hard problem to solve, and it's a difficult business to run, because there are so many challenges around physically how good a bit of engineering a robot has to be to actually operate effectively on a farmer's field. Different weather conditions, different soil types, different topographies of the field. It's things like dealing with mud, and just simple things are challenges, are engineering challenges. Not insurmountable at all, but engineering challenges. And then for the software, again, we try pretty hard to build on top of existing geospatial or farm software, and there just wasn't anything that was as accurate as we wanted it to be. So I think over this time, it's worth saying, the proposition had become per plant farming. So it had become, we're going to gather data on every single plant in a field, and the first crop we chose to focus on was wheat, which is one of the biggest crops in the UK. So that is, if you think of a field of wheat, there are approaching, depending on the size of the field, they're approaching billions of wheat plants in a field. So that challenge of gathering billions of data points and knowing exactly where each data point is, giving an exact georeference point, and then being able to go in and do something different to one data point versus the point right next to it. Treat this plant differently to this plant, or identify that there is a wheat plant here and a weed right next to it, and then kill the weed, but don't kill the wheat plant. For us, this was about digitizing the field. It was about truly taking farming into a different space. I think the example I used and talked about at the time and thought about was, think about how other sectors have transformed because digitization has become possible. So the example would be like the mobile phone, which has simultaneously, like over the last 10 years, become massively more powerful and massively cheaper. And really, it's because it's a series of digital technologies built on top of each other, and it's become this computing platform. But farming over the same time period hasn't become massively more powerful. The technology that we use, it's become incrementally more powerful, slightly more powerful, and it certainly hasn't become cheaper. And we thought those things could become possible if we started with the first step of digitization. But the technical challenge around that is one that we've, as I stand here now in February 2021, I think we've solved that. But it's taken until now to solve, what we talked about in 2017 naively as, okay, well, this is the first step. We'll just go and get a per plant database, right? Done, and then we'll go on to do all these other things. And actually, that's proved to be really tricky. There were constant challenges around, you're trying to do too much. This is too complicated. This is too big a problem for you to try and solve. And there may have been times when they were right, but I think I'm really pleased we've stuck to our guns, because now we've got something that really is valuable, that we can build on, and we know how difficult it is to get to this point. So it's going to be difficult for people to quickly copy what we're doing, because it's because of the realities of computers interacting with nature, which is the tricky thing, and I see that as being the next frontier in a way for technology. We've come so far over the last couple of decades with computers interacting with computers, and there's all these graphs you can look at, the increase in processing speed of microchips over the last couple of decades, and it's an exponential growth curve. But the next step is, okay, well, how do you get computers to interact with the natural world, and to increase our understanding of nature, and to improve the way that we're able to interact with it? We have built the basis for that, but we're still right at the start, to be honest.
I love that though, because it almost feels like, yes, you're building robots to help farmers, but it feels like you are building a platform that will ultimately be the underlying technology for countless other applications. So it's almost like all this groundwork could branch off into all these different areas. That's so exciting and sort of chills down the spine.
Well, I mean, yes, for me too. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly the vision, that we become the platform that enables farming to be transformed. And what you say is really interesting about other technologies. This was I think one of the, as I became aware of what robots could do and understood the potential for them. There were so many examples where I looked around the farming industry and thought, well, that's a stupid way of doing things. And so there are really good sensors and really good application technologies that are at the moment designed to be deployed by a human being. And these are intensely boring things like going out into a field and taking a sample of the soil. After, there's great sensors, really good technology, but it's in a handheld device. So after a while, the human being just goes, well, I'm a bit bored of this. And you end up with a data set that's a bit gappy. Maybe the sample hasn't been taken in exactly the same way. And you've got like part of the field's been done in a really good way and the rest of the field hasn't been done very well at all. And so you end up with something where you go, well, there's nothing I can trust to really change my decision here. But actually, a technology like that is a perfect example of what could be deployed by a robot. A robot just does it 24 hours, does it in exactly the same way, time after time, and what you then get is a data set that will transform the way you take a decision. And this, a way of expressing what we're trying to do is that we're trying to turn farming into an exact science, to move it from being something where decisions are taken on gut instinct and actions are taken in a really broad brush way, towards something that's done with surgical precision. And we've the sins of the last century, I suppose, really have been about, it's all about speed, it's all about scale. Don't worry about the accuracy. Just as long as you can cover the ground quickly, that's fine, because that's the best way to produce food. And the next wave of agricultural technology needs to be about doing things in a really precise way.
This is probably a good point actually to introduce the robots, because we haven't actually talked about what they do. So can you talk briefly about Tom, Dick and Harry, and maybe a little bit more about Wilma and how she relates to Tom, Dick and Harry, just so our listeners understand what's coming?
Yeah, our robots are called Tom, Dick and Harry. So Tom is a scanning robot, and that was Ben's idea, by the way, to come up with those names. So Tom is a scanning robot, and he goes out into the field and basically digitizes the field by identifying all of the plants and all of the weeds that are in that field. That data is then sent to Wilma, and Wilma is the boss. She's the brains of the operation, so she is sucking in the data. She's using machine learning and AI algorithms to recognize what she's looking at. So she's identifying the crop. She's also identifying the weeds. In time, she's also going to have really detailed soil data, as I was explaining. So she's going to know exactly what the variations in soil are around the field. She's also going to recognise disease issues, pest damage, and nutrient issues, so that you've got all of the things that could go wrong for a crop understood by this computer. And then at various times through the year, there are going to be actions that need to be taken. And so this is where Dick and Harry come in. So the first use of Dick is that he's a non-chemical weeding robot, and this is really what we've advanced with first of all. So Wilma identifies a weed in a field, gives it this exact geo-reference point. Dick goes out to that exact location, and then he physically touches the weed with an electrically charged arm, sends electricity through that weed, and then kills it without using any chemicals. So this is it. That's a huge step forward for farming, because herbicide resistance is a massive issue in farming globally, and we're trying to take the herbicides out of the equation. There are all sorts of reasons why using less herbicides are good, trying to reduce pollution and improve soil health and things like that. So we're going to use electricity to kill the weeds. And then Dick is also a broader crop care robot. So he is still applying chemicals and he is still applying fertilizer, but he's doing it in a much more accurate way. And the power of artificial intelligence is that you can start to be much more accurate with your predictions around when a particular fertilizer, when a particular pesticide might be required. And you can start to make assessments of that earlier than the human eye can detect it. So we're trying in those instances to move away from one of the big problems in farming at the moment, which is that these chemicals, these fertilizers are just routinely applied without necessarily identifying a pest or identifying a disease. Farmers just go, well, I think there's a bit of a risk, so I'll apply it anyway. We're trying to, as I say, get much more exact with that, both in terms of how we take a decision and in terms of how we apply. And then to finish off, Harry is a planting robot, so a lightweight, autonomous planting robot going out into the field and placing seeds individually into the ground and doing it in a really exact way. And a really interesting thing we discovered when we started looking at Harry was that in trial plots, what we noticed was that they were achieving yields approaching 3 times what was achieved in a commercial environment. And so that was really interesting to us, because then he thought, well, it's not the biology or the genetics that's holding us back from actually producing much more food. It is something to do with the farming system. There's something that is not optimum about the farming system. And so that is one of the things that Harry is designed to try and solve, is to actually develop a way of managing a field that significantly increases the productivity of that field. And so the robots are automating existing processes, and they are doing things in a much more accurate way. But where the power really comes in, I think, of what we're trying to develop is in 2 ways. Firstly, the thing that we're going to be able to enable is an interconnected network of robots, so of learning machines, of computers, basically going out into the field. And what that means is, and something that farmers are really fond of saying, is you've got 40 harvests to learn about your farm and to learn how to grow your crop. And so you learn from experience. You do something on your farm, it works or it doesn't work, and then the next year you try and improve it. But in reality, that improvement is really slow. What robots and artificial intelligence will enable is a massive acceleration of that learning cycle. What if a farmer didn't have 40 harvests, they had 40,000 harvests or 40 million harvests? Because every harvest that happens is a learning experience for that robot. And once you've got thousands of these robots, globally, learning, they're not only learning from the things that are happening on their farm, they're also learning from the things that are happening on other farms. So a certain seed spacing for a certain soil type at a certain longitude or latitude is experimented with, and the robot learns, or the robot takes an action and it works or it doesn't work, but the robot learns from the experience. And then that learning is immediately shared throughout the whole network. One of the problems with farming at the moment is that farmers are quite isolated, and what happens on that farm is down to the journals that the farmer happens to have read, or the conferences they happen to have attended, or how switched on they are to better ways of doing things. This interconnected network will enable decisions to be taken much more quickly, and actually you develop a learning network. And the other thing, just whilst we're on, where farming could go, the other thing we get excited about is the potential for actually developing a farming system that moves away from monocultures. If you drive around the countryside today, the way the countryside looks has changed really significantly over the last 150 years. And that has been to make the machinery that we use in farming more efficient. Miles and miles of hedges have been removed. Trees have been removed from fields. Fields are big, open, square units of production now. And in those fields you will see a monoculture. It'll all be wheat, or it'll all be corn, or whatever it might be, and that's to make the job of the machinery operator more efficient. It's to make the sprayer operator more efficient, or the combine harvester operator more efficient. But actually, if it's possible to stick a seed in the ground, to watch that seed turn into a plant, and then to treat that plant differently to the plant next to it throughout its life cycle, and then even eventually, ultimately, harvest that plant individually. So to say that this plant is ready to harvest, but the one next to it isn't, then why wouldn't you have a mix of different species in the field? You could have multiple different varieties of a particular crop. You could have a commercial crop next to a crop that wasn't commercial but was attracting pollinators of a particular sort. And if you did that, then you would immediately reduce the amount of fertilizer that is required, which is millions of tons around the world. Because at the moment you've got a load of genetically identical things next to each other, which is an entirely unnatural creation. And so because you've got that, of course you exhaust the soil of a particular nutrient, and therefore of course you have to replace that nutrient synthetically. And the same thing with disease, because you've got genetically identical things next to each other. One plant gets the disease, the risk of all of the plants getting the disease is really high. So therefore you spray the whole field with a chemical. And we think there is the potential to get away from that and to bring biodiversity back into the field, and to do things on the per plant level, as we're saying.
This is so fascinating, and I mean, it strikes me that what you are trying to achieve is the change is so enormous and can have such an impact on farmers, on our economy, but also on biodiversity. It just feels like it's almost too big for two men. Does it ever feel really overwhelming that you're trying to do all these things, and it's like trying to push the needle on like 10 different massive industries at once almost?
Yes, but it has never felt too big, because I'm painfully aware of my own limitations. I don't know how to do any of this stuff that I've just told you about in terms of actually practically putting it together. I think the thing that I realised quite early on was what we were talking about was technically possible. We weren't waiting for new things to be invented that would enable it to happen. So therefore, the skills that we need are out there in the world. And you say two men, there's more than 40 of us in the team now, and as that team's grown, my confidence in what we're doing has increased at every stage, because I don't know how to, I didn't know how to go out and map a field and get an exact location for each plant. But we found 2 or 3 people who, between them, had the skills to work that out. And we think we're the first people in the world to truly work that out. And so they'd never done it before, but they had the requisite skills. And so my job is about getting people excited about this as a concept and as something that they want to devote, the best years of their life towards. And so it's not that it feels too big, but I think that we have to be realistic about the chunks that we bite off, and we move as quickly as we can, but we have to be realistic about the range of different things that we can do in the first swoop. But we think that the things I've described to you around an end to monocultures and a massive increase in biodiversity and reduction in pollution and things, I don't think those things are reliant on, if small robot company doesn't succeed, those things won't happen. I think those things will happen. They are an inevitable change of just a better use of technology to produce the food that we eat. But I think we're one of the first companies to see it, and this is just a wave that we're trying to catch. And the longer we're able to surf that wave, the more we will be able to find the best talent that does know how to solve all of these problems. And we've the journey of Small Robot Company has been one about staying alive until the next stage, when you can get the next grant in or the next round of investment in, and then you can hire, the next level or the next rung of people that you need for to solve the next problem that you're looking at, and that is a thing that is, I will say, in some senses that has got easier over the 4 years. That really felt like pushing water uphill to start with, and now, I think it's an easier decision to join Small Robot Company now and to go, well, this is something that I really want to focus on, than it was 4 years ago. And if we stay alive for another 4 years, that'll be easier again. And so it's momentum. It's staying with it. It's not trying to solve everything initially. And whilst we have a really big vision, and it is it's a multi-decade vision. I think this idea of per-plant farming, I think per-plant farming will become the dominant form of farming system in the world over the next 20 years or so. But so what we're trying to do is stay alive for those 20 years, and become one of the leading players in that market. And so that is, I really see this as being something that this is not like I'm going to work on this for the next 2 years and then get out. This is something I really want to work on, if we're able to, for the next for a good chunk of the rest of my career.
And that point about not biting off more than you can chew, I'm interested in terms of your advice to other founders or would-be founders. When you encounter a new issue, like for example, you kind of had to have an AI built in order to analyse these billion data points per field. Did you go immediately, we have to build that ourselves? Did you find that off the shelf somewhere? When you encounter a sort of barrier like that, we need this thing, what's your approach to get over that barrier?
A quote that I heard the chief executive of Waymo say the other day was, building autonomous cars is a team sport, and I think that applies to this. This is a team sport, and so the approach is find really good people. That's obviously expensive, but also partner wherever possible. And so for the example of the AI, we did that through. We did that through our Innovate UK bid, and we partnered with a company, and for 3 years, they provided a lot of the AI solution. And then, as we've gone on, we've gone, well, this is something that we're going to look to build. We're going to look to build in house. That decision to partner with them took us way further forward than we would have been if we tried to build that all ourselves. But we had the experience of partnering with them. It worked out very nicely for both of us. They actually got acquired by Intel, and part of what they were doing with us was a big part of their sell, and that fit in with exactly what they wanted to do. And then that's prompted us to go, okay, well, this is something we're going to build in house. But now we've got the resources, we can actually afford the skilled data scientists and AI specialists to actually build this thing in house. So it's. I think we've always taken a partnership approach. If we can find a quicker way to get there by tapping into things that other people have already figured out, we will do that. There's obviously a balance, because you do want to create your own IP. You don't want to give away too much in terms of dilution. So there isn't a really clear formula. But we've always taken the approach that we're going to be pragmatic and try and partner wherever that is sensible.
And just finally, what about how you learn and develop as a leader? Have you found any great mentors along the journey? Any people who have really helped guide you to figure a lot of this stuff out?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I've learned a lot from Ben. As I said, to start with, and so that partnership has been really important. This is my first time doing this entrepreneurial journey, so leaning on people that had done it before is really important. And then along the way, I've met other peers, really, other entrepreneurs, and so that is really important. I've invested in coaching before. and still do. And I've tried both group coaching. So this is business coaching where you get together and you talk about your own businesses and try and solve those problems in groups. And then I've also done one-to-one coaching as well with. So the one-to-one was with an experienced entrepreneur who'd sort of been through multiple funding rounds and exits and things like that, and that is really valuable. And then the other thing that we did quite early on was build a good non-exec team, so a team of advisors. We didn't initially give them any sort of stock options, and for some of them we didn't pay them straight away. So I think that is something that even if you're a resource-strapped early startup, that is something where you can get some really good people with really relevant experience to give you. We ask from ours for a couple of hours a month where we have a non-exec meeting, which does take some time to prepare, and then we have probably an hour a month on top of that, either one-on-one or both Ben and I will catch up with one of them and we'll sort of do a deep dive on a particular issue. And so that's a great way of going. So when we thought about it, we thought, okay, we want someone who's really experienced in partnerships. We want and actually developing really good partnerships with big corporates. We want someone who's done the whole entrepreneur's journey, and so we've got a guy who was sort of employee number 3 into a company that eventually sold for 100 million and went through multiple rounds, and we also then we wanted someone who is experienced in developing hardware, and then someone who's experienced in developing AI. And we initially thought, okay, those are the big things where, if we're honest, we don't really know what we're talking about. And so that took some time to find some really good people, but that's been a great way of accessing mentorship.
No, that's wonderful advice. And not trying to do everything yourself, because I think that can feel like way too much when you start building a business, especially an ambitious business, because you just think initially that it's all on you, but actually that partnership approach where you're both working towards a similar goal and your skills complement one another, I think that's just brilliant. That's fantastic advice for anyone building a business.
Yeah. So the memorable concept is who, not how. Which came from one of my from one of the coaching workshops I did, which I just thought that was great, because your immediate instinct as an entrepreneur when you go, we're going to build some robots, how do I do that, and you can or whatever the problem might be, your immediate instinct is to jump in there and try and solve those problems yourselves. And as I said, the skills are out there. It's just a matter of finding the right who that can help you to do the how, if that makes sense. And if you think about, if you use that as a mindset, I found that to be just so useful, because then there is no problem that is too daunting. It never feels too big. It's just a case of finding the right who and finding the way that works for both of you, for you to be able to access those skills. Might be employing them. It might be employing them on a part-time basis. You can get some amazing people to come and work for you for like 1 or 2 days a week, and they'd be way more than you could afford yourself, but they can come and work part-time, and it's a great win for everyone. Or it can be a partnership. It can be outsourcing it. There are multiple different ways of finding a solution to that problem. But yeah, the who, not how mindset is a really important one.
Yeah, I love it. Sam, thank you so much. I really feel like I'm kind of looking at the face of the man who's changing the way food goes from the farm all the way to my plate. So this is quite a big moment, and I feel like I've learnt so much, not just about building businesses, but just about farming and about what goes into actually growing a crop and keeping it healthy. It's fascinating. So thank you so much. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're on YouTube, we'd love to know what you think, so do give us a comment below or a like, or find us on social media with the hashtag #SoundAdvicePodcast. Make sure you get new episodes as they land by hitting subscribe too, and for more great content, head over to sage.com/podcast. Stay tuned for our next episode with serial entrepreneur Jess Ratty, who spills the beans about selling up, bad accountants, and only doing business with people you like.